Hi everyone, glad you made it. This is an original story from Hidden Revenge Family, and it took a turn you truly didn't see coming. Let's get into it.
I walked into my parents' house 5 minutes late on purpose. Not because I was busy, but because arriving on time at a celebration for my younger sister had never once worked in my favor. The driveway was already full of black SUVs and polished sedans, the kind that announce rank before anyone steps out. Inside, the place smelled like expensive cologne and catered food that no one would touch. This wasn't a home tonight, it was a stage. I adjusted the collar of my uniform as I stepped through the door. It was an older service dress, properly pressed, properly worn, and noticeably plain. No ribbons, no medals, no chest candy. That always bothered people, especially the kind of people who measured worth in inches of fabric and polished metal. Sienna's laugh carried across the room before I even saw her. It always did. Clear practice calibrated to land well with an audience. She stood near the fireplace, glass in hand, surrounded by officers, contractors, and retired brass who still liked being called sir. My father stood just behind her shoulder, smiling the way he only smiled when someone important was watching. I stayed near the edge of the room. That was my habit. Observe. Don't interfere. Don't perform. Someone brushed past me and whispered, "Didn't know you were still active," like it was a compliment wrapped around a question mark. I nodded once and let it die there. Sienna was in full stride. She was telling a story about a press briefing overseas, something about calming the public during a communications blackout. She talked with her hands perfectly manicured, perfectly controlled. Every pause was intentional. Every laugh landed on cue. If you didn't know better, you'd think she'd personally prevented a war with a well-timed soundbite. And that's when the general turns to me, she said, smiling wide, and says, "Lieutenant Colonel Sterling, we need your face on this." A ripple of approval moved through the room. That's when she saw me. Her smile didn't disappear. It froze. Then it shifted into something sharper. Her eyes flicked to my uniform, then to my empty chest, and back to my face. She took a slow sip from her glass, buying time. The room followed her gaze like a trained reflex. She tilted her head just enough to look curious instead of hostile. "Oh," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You came." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My presence was already the problem. She turned her body slightly, keeping me in view while still addressing her audience. I'm honestly surprised, she went on, her tone light, almost playful. "I thought you'd be busy, typing." A few people laughed. Not hard, not comfortably. I felt my father tense behind her. He didn't say anything. He never did in moments like this. Silence had always been his version of leadership at home. Sienna set her glass down and took a step closer to me. Just one. Enough to make it personal without looking aggressive. "I mean," she said, glancing again at my uniform, "I really don't understand how you keep getting away with pretending to be an officer." The room went quiet in the way rooms do when everyone senses a line has been crossed, but no one wants to be the first to react. "That uniform," she continued, her voice firm now, "isn't for people who sit behind keyboards all day and live off taxpayer money." She smiled when she said it. That smile had won her interviews, promotions, followers. It made cruelty sound like common sense. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have something to say, but because responding would have given her what she wanted. A scene, a contrast, something to point at later and call instability. Instead, I stood there and met her eyes. Calm, neutral, gray. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else looked down at their drink. Sienna held my gaze for a second longer, waiting for a reaction that never came. Then she laughed, soft and dismissive, like she'd just told a harmless joke. "Anyway," she said, turning back to the room, "where was I?" The conversation resumed, but the air didn't. People were listening now, but they were also watching me, measuring, reassessing, wondering why a major with no visible achievements had shown up at a lieutenant colonel's victory lap. I moved toward the hallway, intending to find some quiet and leave early. That was when I saw her step away from the group. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. I recognized the posture, the slight angle of the shoulder, the way she shielded her phone with her body while pretending to scroll. I paused near the doorway, out of sight but close enough to hear. "Yes," she said quietly into the phone. "I'm certain." A pause. "No, I understand the implications. That's why I'm calling." Another pause. Longer this time. "She's here right now, wearing the uniform." Her voice dropped tight and controlled. "I believe she falsified elements of her service record to qualify for special compensation. Intelligence-related pay. Classified assignments that don't exist. She glanced over her shoulder, checking the room. I stepped back into the shadow. I'm filing a formal report, she continued. With CID, yes. Army Criminal Investigation Division. She listened, nodding. Because if I don't, she said, and it turns out to be true, then I'm complicit. There it was. The word she always used when she wanted to sound brave. I waited until she ended the call and slipped the phone back into her clutch. She straightened her jacket, squared her shoulders, and walked back into the light like nothing had happened. I didn't confront her. I didn't warn anyone. I didn't leave. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. My pulse was normal. This wasn't shock. This was confirmation. All my life, Sienna had needed an audience. And when applause wasn't enough, she needed a target. Across the room, she laughed again, louder this time, as someone congratulated her on her service to the image of the military. My father joined in, proud and relieved, like the danger had passed. I took a sip of water and tasted nothing. Reporting me wasn't an impulsive move. It was calculated. Public humiliation first. Official accusation second. If it worked, she'd look principled. If it didn't, she'd look concerned but blameless. Either way, she'd win. I set the glass down and adjusted my jacket one last time. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger clouds judgment, and judgment was my job. What she'd just done wasn't a family dispute. It was a formal allegation, and allegations leave records. The envelope was waiting on my kitchen counter when I got home, centered, like someone wanted to make sure I couldn't miss it. Plain, official. No drama in the packaging, just the kind of paper that never brings good news. I didn't open it right away. I set my keys down, took off my jacket, and washed my hands first. Old habit. You don't rush bad information. You control when it enters your head. When I finally slid a finger under the flap, the wording was exactly as expected. Pending investigation, temporary suspension, access credentials revoked until further notice, no emotion, no accusation stated outright, just procedure doing what procedure always does when someone with the right rank knows which lever to pull. By noon the next day, my badge no longer opened doors. I wasn't escorted out. That only happens when someone wants a photo. This was quieter. My supervisor didn't look me in the eye when he handed me the notice. He said, "This is standard, the way people say. It's just business when they know it isn't." I cleared my desk in under 10 minutes. There wasn't much to pack. Classified work doesn't leave souvenirs. The calls started before I reached the parking lot. Not from Sienna. She never called. She preferred statements and intermediaries. The first message was from my father, short, direct. "Come by the house tonight, we need to talk." He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask what happened. He never did when the situation involved optics. That evening, his house felt colder than usual, not physically, strategically. The photos on the walls told the same story. They always had promotion ceremonies, handshakes with men whose names opened doors. There was no picture of my work. There couldn't be. He was already seated at the dining table when I arrived. Papers were laid out neatly in front of him, squared at the edges. He didn't offer me a drink. That told me everything. "Sit," he said. I sat. He slid one document toward me. "This is a temporary measure." I read it without touching it. A legal commitment. Voluntary forfeiture of any claim to my grandmother's house. The same house I'd paid the property taxes on for a decade. The same house my grandmother had left in trust, assuming her family would act like family. "This isn't about money," he said quickly, anticipating the argument. "It's about restoring confidence. Confidence in what I asked." He leaned back. The sterling name. There it was, the real asset. "Sienna's accusation has consequences." He continued. "Even if it goes nowhere, people are watching. This gesture shows accountability. Accountability for something I didn't do." He pressed his lips together. "Perception matters." I looked at the line where my signature would go. It was blank. "Waiting, if you sign," he said. Lowering his voice, "This goes away faster. And if I don't?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I stood up and pushed the document back toward him. "I'm not signing something that admits guilt." His expression hardened just a little. "Then you're choosing to make this harder for everyone." That included him. That included Sienna. That didn't include me. I left without raising my voice. I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. Silence carried farther. The narrative took shape fast after that. faster than any investigation ever could. Sienna didn't post about me directly. She didn't have to. She shared articles about government waste, about fraud, about the importance of transparency in uniform. She spoke at panels about earning public trust. She never said my name, but she didn't need to. People connected dots when they were pointed in the right direction. Colleagues stopped replying to messages. Not all of them. Just enough to send a signal. Invitations dried up. Meetings happened without me. Even the unofficial ones I was technically still cleared to attend. Someone leaked a nickname, tax parasite. I heard it secondhand the way things like that travel, always framed as concern. I thought you should know what people are saying. I thanked them and did nothing with the information. That was the point. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain my role. I didn't argue timelines or clearance levels. I gave short, neutral responses when required, and none when I wasn't. No emotion, no reaction, no fuel. People get bored when there's nothing to feed on. With my access suspended, I had time. And time for me is rarely empty. I sat at my desk at home, powered up my personal system, and went back to the kind of work that doesn't require a badge. Pattern recognition, financial logic. Digital fingerprints that don't show up unless you know how to look sideways. I started with accounts I was legally tied to. Utility payments, maintenance fees, old family obligations that had landed on me by default because I was good with numbers. 10 years of quiet transactions no one else had bothered to track. Sienna's spending stood out immediately, not because it was illegal on the surface, but because it was curated. Rounded numbers, predictable timing, the kind of discipline that doesn't come from budgeting but from brand management. Campaign consultants, image firms, lifestyle expenses routed through shell services that billed as communication support. All charged back to accounts labeled operational, all justifiable if you didn't ask the right questions. I asked different ones. I cross-referenced dates with her public appearances. The spikes matched. Every major interview, every award cycle, every moment her profile needed a boost. Money flowed in clean, well-documented streams that no one ever bothered to audit deeply. Why would they? She was the face. Faces don't get questioned. They get protected. I didn't download anything I wasn't allowed to. I didn't access restricted systems. I didn't need to. Public records are loud when you know how to listen. So are internal reports, once they've been sanitized for presentation. By the third night, the picture was clear. Not criminal yet. Not enough to bring down a career, but structured, intentional, repetitive. This wasn't sloppiness. This was confidence. Sienna believed the story she was selling because it had always worked before. She believed visibility was the same as value. She believed attention was armor. She was wrong. While she was busy shaping how people saw her, she'd left fingerprints everywhere else. Budget lines, vendor overlaps, approval chains that looped too tightly around her own authority. I saved everything, labeled it, backed it up in places that didn't care if my badge was active. By the end of the week, I understood the real shape of my isolation. It wasn't emotional, it was strategic. They thought cutting me off would make me desperate, loud, sloppy. Instead, it gave me quiet. And quiet is where I do my best work. I closed the blinds in my apartment and let the room settle into its usual quiet, the kind that doesn't ask questions. My place was small by choice. One bedroom, one desk, one window that looked out over a parking lot. No one ever bothered to landscape. Nothing here impressed visitors, which made it perfect. No one ever wanted to stay long. No one ever asked what I was working on. I powered up my laptop and plugged in the external drive I kept wrapped in an old t-shirt. 10 years of family-related financial maintenance lived on that drive. Bills, fees, transfers I'd handled because I was responsible and because no one else wanted to bother. I hadn't reviewed most of it in years. There'd never been a reason. Now there was. I didn't start with Sienna's accounts. That would have been too obvious. I started with mine, my own identifiers, my own records, my own financial fingerprints. If something had been done in my name, it would leave a shadow even if the numbers looked clean. The first pass showed nothing unusual. Income streams matched, tax filings aligned. No alerts, no anomalies. That's the thing about good fraud. It doesn't scream, it whispers. I widened the window. I pulled transaction metadata instead of balances, routing behavior instead of amounts, timing instead of totals. Patterns always break somewhere. You just have to stop looking where everyone else is trained to look. That's when I saw it. A sequence of authorizations I didn't recognize. Old, scattered, buried in service renewals and cross-border compliance checks most people would scroll past without thinking. The kind of digital paper cuts that don't bleed unless you press on them. Someone had used my military identity credential. Not a full theft. That would have triggered alarms. This was partial, selective. Enough to validate authority without drawing scrutiny. I sat back in my chair and exhaled slowly. That credential wasn't just personal. It was tied to my clearance history, my specialization, my reputation for being invisible, which meant whoever used it knew exactly what it could get past. I traced the access points next: proxy layers, authentication timestamps, device signatures that didn't belong to me but knew how to pretend they did. The work was clean, professional, not Sienna's style at first glance. Then I followed the money, not the obvious transfers, the supporting ones, consulting retainers, technical advisement fees, all routed through a defense contractor with a friendly logo and a deliberately boring name, the kind that advertised reliability and never made headlines. They operated overseas, not illegally, just far enough away to complicate jurisdiction. I pulled their public filings, then their subcontractor lists, then their subcontractors' subcontractors. It took hours. I didn't rush. Rushing makes you miss things. That's when the debt surfaced. Not directly, not labeled as debt. Lifestyle financing disguised as asset management. High-interest instruments masked as short-term liquidity solutions. The kind of financial products sold to people who believe their income curve will always go up. Sienna had overextended herself. Private schools, image consultants, properties leased under shell trusts. Everything designed to look sustainable as long as promotions kept coming and no one asked for a sudden payoff. But something had cracked. A deadline, a call she couldn't delay. And instead of downsizing, she'd leveraged access. My access. I stared at the screen until my eyes started to burn. Not because I was shocked, but because the scope kept expanding the longer I looked. This wasn't just misuse. It was facilitation. My identity had been used to authorize technical exchanges that should have required a dozen additional checks. Data handoffs. Verification shortcuts. Plausible deniability wrapped in paperwork, so clean it could pass any surface audit. She hadn't just accused me of fraud. She'd positioned me as the fallback suspect. If anything came loose, it would trace back to my credentials, my background, my silence. That was the hidden truth. Sienna wasn't trying to destroy me because she hated me. She was doing it because she needed me in place, quiet, isolated, discredited enough that no one would listen if I spoke up. I leaned forward and rested my elbows on the desk. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was national security with a smiling face. I cataloged everything, every transaction chain, every overlap between her public schedule and private authorizations. Every instance where my identity bridged a gap that shouldn't have existed. I didn't copy files from restricted systems. I didn't access anything I wasn't legally entitled to review. I let the data tell its own story through correlation alone. That's harder to dismiss, harder to bury. By dawn, I had a timeline. The first misuse of my identifier came months before the party, before the accusation, before the humiliation, which meant the plan hadn't started with me walking into that house in uniform. That moment had just been the launch. I made coffee and drank it black standing at the counter while the city woke up outside. Cars started, doors slammed. Normal life resumed like nothing had shifted. I thought about calling someone, an old contact, a quiet channel. I decided against it. Not yet. Information is fragile in its early stages. You don't hand it over until it can survive without you, until it's heavy enough that dropping it makes noise no one can ignore. I encrypted the drive and split the archive. Redundancy matters. So does patience. By the time I shut the system down, I wasn't angry. Anger assumes betrayal is personal. This was transactional. Sienna had chosen visibility over integrity and assumed the math would protect her. She believed clean numbers meant clean hands. She forgot one thing: clean numbers still add up. And once you see the total, there's no pretending it was an accident. My phone vibrated once on the kitchen counter while I was rinsing a mug. A sharp single buzz like a tap on the shoulder. I didn't rush to it. I dried my hands first slow and deliberate, then picked it up and read the message that had already decided something for me. You are no longer a member of the Sterling family. That was it. No greeting, no explanation, no signature. Just my mother's words sitting in the family group chat, like a sealed door. A second later, the chat disappeared. I'd been removed. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then locked the phone and set it face down. I didn't feel shocked. Shock comes from surprise. This felt procedural, like an update to a policy that had been in effect for years and was finally written down. The message told me two things. First, the family had aligned. Second, they believed I was already gone. I finished my coffee and opened my closet. I passed over the uniforms without hesitation. Tonight wasn't about rank. It wasn't about credibility. It wasn't about reminding anyone who I was supposed to be. I pulled out a black outfit instead. Simple, clean, no insignia, no history stitched into the fabric. Then I grabbed the small hardshell suitcase from the top shelf. It wasn't heavy, but it mattered. Inside was a stripped-down version of everything I'd uncovered so far. Encrypted copies, redundant keys, logs organized by date, not accusation. It wasn't evidence meant to convince family. It was ammunition meant to survive contact with reality. Sienna's invitation arrived an hour later, dressed up as courtesy. Family gathering tonight, the text read. We should clear the air. The address was the housing complex near base, the one with manicured lawns and rules about who belonged. The message wasn't about reconciliation, it was about optics. I replied with one word, okay. I arrived exactly on time. Music floated through the open doors light, and carefully chosen the kind meant to suggest celebration without ever risking sincerity. Cars lined the curb nicer than they needed to be. People dressed for photos they assumed might be taken. I stepped inside and felt the shift immediately. Conversations dipped, eyes tracked. Someone whispered my name like it was a question they didn't want answered. Sienna spotted me from across the room and smiled wide, relieved. She'd expected me to show up angry or defensive. She hadn't planned for quiet. She was dressed perfectly, of course. Effortless, polished, surrounded by people who nodded at the right moments. Her boyfriend stood beside her, tall, confident, wearing a suit that suggested proximity to power without ever naming it. She raised her glass when she saw me. You came, she said loud enough for nearby guests to hear. I nodded once. No smile, no tension. She tilted her head. I see you finally stopped pretending. Her eyes flicked to my clothes, then to the suitcase in my hand. Confusion crossed her face for half a second before she recovered. What's that? She asked. Mine, I said. That earned a laugh. Her boyfriend chuckled, too unsure why but unwilling to be left out. She took a step closer and lowered her voice, performing intimacy for an audience. This is awkward, Brooke, but we agreed as a family that it's best if you move on. She gestured around the room. This community has standards. I looked past her at the guests. Officers, staffers, people who measured safety in proximity to reputation. I recognized a few faces. None of them met my eyes. Sienna turned slightly, bringing her boyfriend fully into the moment. You remember Alex, she said. He's been advising on some high-level initiatives. Alex extended a hand like this was a networking event. I didn't take it. Sienna's smile tightened. You know, she continued, her voice bright again, it's actually sad. You had potential once, but not everyone is built for real service. Some people just fade. She laughed softly. A dead weight, a drain, her boyfriend nodded. It's tough, he said, offering sympathy that hadn't been requested. The system gets abused. Exactly, Sienna said. That's why this matters. Accountability. I shifted the suitcase from one hand to the other. The movement was small, but it drew her attention. You're being asked to leave, she said. Tonight, this housing area. Officially, by who I asked. Her smile returned sharp and satisfied. By me. She let that sit, enjoying the authority she believed she held. I looked at her for a long moment, not searching her face, just confirming what I already knew. Okay, I said. The word landed wrong. Too easy. Too calm. She blinked. That's it. That's it. Her confidence wavered just slightly. She recovered by raising her voice. You hear that? She said to the room. She knows when she's beat. A few people laughed. Nervously. I didn't correct her. I didn't argue. I didn't open the suitcase. Not yet. I set it down gently at my feet. You wanted me here, I said. My voice steady, so here I am. She folded her arms. To be clear, this is your last chance to walk away quietly. I already did, I said. That confused her enough to irritate her. Brooke, she snapped, dropping the performance for a second, you're done. You don't have allies. You don't have access. You don't even have a family backing you anymore. I nodded. I know. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice again. You should have stayed invisible. There it was, the truth she hadn't meant to say out loud. I picked up the suitcase and turned toward the door. Behind me, she laughed again, louder than before, making sure the room heard it. Look at her, she said, walking out like she still matters. No one stopped me. No one asked questions. They never do when they think a story is already finished. Outside, the night air was cool and quiet. I paused on the sidewalk and took one slow breath. Everything I'd endured up to this point had been restraint. Silence. Control. This was the moment it changed shape. Because once you're officially cast out, there's nothing left to protect. And nothing more dangerous than someone with nothing left to lose, except the truth they've been holding the entire time. The alert came through while I was tying my shoes, a soft chime from my phone that didn't belong to any app most people used. I paused with one lace in my hand and checked the screen. Someone had just tried to access my grandmother's savings account. Not probe it, not review it, access it. I finished tying the knot before I did anything else. Then I stood up and let the moment settle. Whoever it was had expected money to be there. They'd expected leverage. What they found instead was nothing. A clean zero where entitlement used to live. I didn't need to guess who it was. That account had been emptied months earlier, quietly and legally. My grandmother had trusted me with the logistics long before she passed. She'd known exactly how the family worked. The money hadn't vanished. It had moved into a locked trust with rules that didn't care about rank, charm, or last names. Sienna had never bothered to check. She'd assumed inheritance worked the same way applause did. Automatically, loudly, in her favor. I imagined her reaction when the screen refreshed and showed nothing. The disbelief, the spike of panic, the scramble for someone to blame. I didn't have to imagine long. 2 hours later, my building manager called to tell me military police were on their way. He sounded apologetic, like he was warning me about a noise complaint. They said it's urgent, he added. Something about classified materials. I thanked him and hung up. I didn't hide anything. I didn't delete anything. I didn't rush. I made tea and set the kettle back on its base. Then I opened my laptop and checked the system status one last time. Everything was armed. Everything was quiet. The program didn't blink. It never did unless something went wrong. I sat at the small kitchen table and waited. The knock came sharp and authoritative, exactly when I expected it. I opened the door without asking who it was. 2 MPs stood there, serious, professional, uncomfortable. One of them read from a tablet. Major Brooks Sterling, we have authorization to search your residence. For what, I asked. Potential theft of classified documents, he said, not meeting my eyes. I stepped aside. Come in. They exchanged a look. People don't usually make it easy. They moved methodically, opening drawers, checking shelves, scanning corners. I stood near the counter with my hands visible, calm enough that one of them glanced at me like I might be the problem for a different reason. Do you have any storage devices? One asked. Yes, I said. Where on the desk? Labeled. That threw them. Most people deny first. I didn't. They inspected the laptop, the external drive, the phone. Everything they touched was clean. No classified markings. No restricted access flags. Just personal equipment, legally owned, properly encrypted. They searched anyway. That was the point. While they worked, I pictured Sienna somewhere else pacing, calling contacts, spinning a story fast enough that it felt like truth. She'd lost access to money she believed was hers, and that kind of loss makes people reckless. She needed pressure. She needed me scared. She needed me detained long enough for something irreversible to happen. That was the trap. After 40 minutes, one of the MPs cleared his throat. We're not finding what we were told to expect. I nodded. That happens. He hesitated. Who reported this? You already know, I said. They finished the search without incident. No arrest, no seizure. Just a report that would quietly note the absence of anything incriminating. As they left, the younger one paused. You should be careful, he said low enough that his partner wouldn't hear. I am, I replied. I closed the door and locked it. Then I walked back to the table and opened the laptop again. The program was still silent. The thing about a dead man's switch is that it doesn't threaten, it doesn't warn, it doesn't negotiate. It just exists, patient and impartial, waiting for a condition to be met. Mine wasn't tied to death. It was tied to abusive process. If I were detained without cause. If my devices were seized under false pretenses. If my access to legal counsel were obstructed. The switch would flip. And when it did, every documented transaction, every identity misuse, every cross-border authorization linked to Sienna would be packaged and delivered to the Department of Justice, complete with timestamps and verification trails. No PR team could talk their way around. I hadn't built it out of paranoia. I'd built it out of math. Systems respond to inputs. People respond to incentives. Sienna believed power meant control. She believed she could apply pressure until I folded or disappeared. She didn't realize she'd just tested the boundaries. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown number. "You think you're clever," it read. I didn't respond. A second message followed. "You stole from the family. Still nothing." The third came with a picture of my grandmother's empty account screen. "You crossed a line." I smiled for the first time that day. I typed one sentence and deleted it before sending. There was no point. Silence had been doing just fine. Instead, I closed the laptop and packed the external drive into the suitcase. Not because I planned to run. Because movement makes people nervous, and nervous people make mistakes. Sienna's biggest flaw wasn't greed. It wasn't arrogance. It was impatience. She'd assumed the absence of money meant the absence of defenses. She'd escalated too fast. She'd involved too many people. And now there was a paper trail leading straight back to her panic. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark for a moment, listening to the city hum outside. The trap hadn't been the search. The trap was letting her believe she'd found something worth forcing, because the next time she pushed, it wouldn't be the MPS at my door. It would be people who didn't knock. The sound that woke me wasn't a knock. It was the deep, violent crack of my front door, giving up all at once, wood splitting where the lock used to pretend it mattered. I was already moving before the second shout came. "Police, don't move." I slid out of bed barefoot on cold tile, heart steady. In a way that would have scared most people. Panic is loud. Training is quiet. I crossed the hallway and opened the kids' door. "Bathroom," I said low and firm. "Now. Floor. Hands over your head. Don't speak unless I tell you." They didn't ask questions. They never did. They trusted my tone more than my words. I ushered them in, closed the door, and locked it from the outside. Then I stepped back into the hall and raised my hands before anyone could tell me to. The apartment filled fast. Heavy boots, flashing lights, weapons aimed with professional precision, not anger. That told me everything. This wasn't rage. This was theater. On the ground, someone yelled. "I'm complying," I said calmly, lowering myself to my knees, then to the floor. No sudden movements. Hands cuffed me loosely, too loosely for someone who believed I was armed with an explosive. Another tell. "Where is it?" the team leader demanded. "I don't have one," I said. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. His eyes were scanning, taking in the space. Small apartment, no wires, no bags, no pressure cooker fantasy tucked in a corner. They cleared the rooms fast. When they reached the bathroom door, I spoke. "There are children in there," I said. "They're unarmed. They're on the floor." The leader nodded and signaled. The door opened. Quiet voices, calm instructions. No screaming. No trauma beyond what the hour already guaranteed. I stayed where I was, face against the floor cheek, pressed a tile. I'd cleaned myself that afternoon. I could hear radio's crackling voices tightening as reality failed to match the script they'd been handed. The team leader crouched next to me. "Do you know why we're here?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He waited. "Someone reported an imminent threat," I continued. "They claimed I was in possession of an explosive device and intended to target a command facility." His jaw tightened. "And you're saying that's false?" "I'm saying you should listen to the call," I replied. He studied me for a long second, not my face, my cadence. You don't survive long in his line of work without learning how to read that. "Which call?" he asked. "The 911 recording," I said. "Specifically, the background signal. There's a frequency embedded under the voice modulation." That got his attention. "Run it," he said into his radio. The apartment went quiet except for the hum of equipment and the distant sound of my kids being escorted into the living room wrapped in blankets, eyes wide but focused. They didn't cry. That made one of the officers flinch. Minutes passed, long enough for adrenaline to turn into suspicion. Then the radio crackled again. "Sir," a voice said, "careful now. We're getting something unusual on the call." "Explain," the leader said. There's a repeating tone beneath the audio. Not ambient noise, it's intentional. I smiled into the floor. Just enough. That tone, I said, matches a secure relay used by military communications contractors, not civilians. The room shifted. I could feel it without seeing it. Weight redistributed. Assumptions collapsing. You're saying this was spoofed, the leader said. I'm saying the caller wanted urgency without traceability, I replied. And they used a system they thought no one would recognize. Who, he asked. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Another voice came over the radio, sharper now. Sir, caller ID was masked, but the routing pinged a restricted network node. We shouldn't be seeing that. The leader exhaled slowly. He stood up and motioned for the cuffs to be removed. What about her? One of the officers asked, confused. She's not our problem, he said. But whoever made that call just became someone else's. He knelt back down and met my eyes. You planned this, he said quietly. I prepared for it, I corrected. There's a difference. He nodded, accepting that. Can you stand? He asked. Yes, he helped me up, then turned to his team. Stand down, no arrest, no seizure, document everything. One of them hesitated. Sir, protocol, I said. Document, he repeated. They moved fast after that. The energy drained out of the room, replaced by something heavier, accountability. As they packed up, the leader lowered his voice. You understand how dangerous this was? Yes, I said. That's why I told my children to lie flat. That won't undo it. I'm not trying to undo it, I said. I'm making sure it doesn't work. He studied me again, then nodded once. You should expect follow-up, he said. I am, I replied. When they finally left, my door hung crooked in its frame, splintered beyond repair. The hallway smelled like ozone and dust. I closed the bathroom door behind the kids and sat with them until their breathing slowed. Are we in trouble? One of them asked. No, I said. Someone else's. I tucked them back into bed and returned to the living room. The silence felt earned now. My phone buzzed. Unknown number again. What did you do? The message read. I didn't respond. A second came through almost immediately. You could have gotten killed. I typed back 3 words. So could you. Then I powered the phone down. Swatting only works if the target panics, if they run, if they give the lie something to grab onto. Sienna had crossed a line she didn't understand. She'd taken a performance meant for public sympathy and turned it into a federal crime with a traceable signal and witnesses trained to notice patterns. She wanted me removed. Instead, she'd announced herself, and the game had shifted from noise to evidence, from family to jurisdiction. I sat on the couch staring at the broken door and waited, because the next move wouldn't come from her. It would come from people who don't need theatrics to end a story. The cuffs were loose on purpose, just enough to remind everyone I was there under suspicion, not because anyone had proven anything. Metal against my wrists, cold and performative. I walked down the hallway at command headquarters with 2 escorts who didn't rush me and didn't slow me down either. That told me the room ahead was already divided. The doors to the hearing room were open, not wide, just enough. Sienna was already inside. She stood near the center table, back straight, hands folded, dressed in a dark blue suit that mirrored a uniform without actually being one. Patriotic without authority. She looked composed in the way people do when they've rehearsed being devastated. Her voice carried as I stepped in. I never imagined I'd be here, she was saying. Especially not because of my own sister. A murmur moved through the room. I didn't look at her yet. I scanned the faces instead. Officers, legal advisors, a civilian oversight rep who didn't blink much. My father sat near the end. Rigid hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. He didn't look at me. His eyes were closed, like that might change the facts. The escorts guided me to the chair opposite Sienna and stopped. No one told me to sit. I did anyway. Sienna turned then slowly, like the moment deserved choreography. There she is, she said, voice cracking, just enough to sound authentic. The person I trusted my whole life. She took a breath and faced the panel again. I didn't want to believe it, she continued. I told myself there had to be a mistake. But the evidence kept stacking up. Fraud, abusive credentials, dangerous behavior that put lives at risk. She looked directly at me now. She's a stain on this institution, Sienna shouted. She's lied to all of us. Her voice echoed. That was intentional. She wanted it on the record at volume. No one interrupted her. That was also intentional. Let her spend herself. I watched her while she spoke. Not emotionally, technically. She was hitting the beats she'd practiced. Loyalty, duty, sacrifice. She framed herself as the reluctant hero, the one who'd chosen country over blood. If you didn't know the context, it was convincing. When she finished, she pressed her lips together and lowered her gaze, like she'd just delivered something heavy and holy. The chair at the head of the table cleared his throat. "Major Sterling," he said, turning to me. "You've heard the allegations. Do you wish to respond?" I stood up carefully. The cuffs clinked just enough to draw attention. I didn't rush to speak. "Yes," I said, "but not the way she expects." Sienna smiled faintly, already preparing for denial, for deflection, for desperation. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. One of the escorts stiffened. "It's a pen," I said calmly, holding it up between two fingers. The chair nodded. "Proceed." I clicked it once and placed it on the table. "This device," I said, "recorded a conversation last night." Sienna's smile faltered. "With whom?" the chair asked. "With a foreign defense contractor," I replied. "And my sister." Sienna laughed sharply. "That's absurd. She's fabricating evidence. She's a cryptography expert. She could fake anything." I nodded. "That's true, which is why I didn't manipulate it at all." I pressed play. Her voice filled the room, clear, confident, familiar. "You'll get the verification you asked for," the recording said. "The credentials are clean. They always are." There was a pause. Then another voice accented cautious. "And the risk manageable," Sienna replied. "My sister's profile covers the trail. If anyone looks, they'll look at her." The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. My father opened his eyes. Sienna froze, not dramatically, completely, like her body hadn't been briefed on what to do next. The recording continued. "I need the funds released by Friday," her voice said. "I can't delay again." Another pause. "Then no, this isn't personal. This is survival." I clicked the pen and the room exhaled all at once. "That recording is doctored." Sienna snapped too fast. "AI generated. Anyone with her skill set could do that." I met her eyes for the first time. "That argument would carry more weight," I said, "if the metadata didn't match a secure line you personally authorized." The chair leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "The call was routed through a contractor-only frequency," I said. "The same one used in the false emergency report against me." A legal advisor shifted in their seat. "That frequency," I continued, "isn't accessible to civilians or to people without a specific clearance and vendor relationship." Sienna's voice rose. "You're twisting technicalities. None of this proves intent." I turned to the panel. "Intent is demonstrated by repetition." I slid a folder forward with my cuffed hands. "Transaction logs," I said. "Identity authorization records. Cross-border approvals made using my credentials. Each one correlates to her travel schedule or debt deadlines." The chair flipped through the pages slowly. Sienna shook her head, backing away from the table. "This is insane. She's been planning this. She's manipulating all of you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My father finally spoke. "Sienna," he said quietly. She didn't look at him. "Sienna," he repeated louder. What she snapped. He swallowed. "Did you do this?" Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I did what I had to," she said. "For the family, for my career." The words landed wrong, too honest, too late. The chair straightened. "Lieutenant Colonel Sterling, you are no longer a witness in this proceeding." Sienna laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "You can't be serious." "We are," he said. "And you will remain seated." Two uniformed officers moved behind her. She turned back to me, eyes wide now, fury replacing performance. "You planned this," she hissed. I met her stare, calm. "No," I said. "I endured it." The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been said. The second the recording stopped, Sienna found her voice again, louder than before, sharper, like volume could reverse physics. "That's fake," she said, pointing at me. I generated. She's a cryptography specialist. This is exactly what she does. She can fabricate anything." She looked around the room, searching for someone to nod, someone to rescue the moment. "You can't seriously take this at face value." No one answered her. I didn't speak either. I didn't need to. The clock on the wall above the command seal kept moving, indifferent to panic. Digital, precise. Red numbers counting seconds. No one else seemed to notice. Sienna kept going, feeding the silence with motion. "She's been manipulating systems for years," she said. "That's how she hid everything. She staged the search. She staged the emergency call. This is all part of her plan." Her voice cracked again, this time without control. "She's dangerous." I glanced at the clock. 8 minutes, 37 seconds. The chair at the head of the table lifted a hand, but Sienna didn't see it. You're all being played, she insisted. She wants you to turn on your own. The red numbers flipped. 8 minutes 59. I shifted my weight slightly, the cuffs brushing against my jacket sleeve. That was it, the last adjustment I made. At exactly 9 minutes, the doors behind the panel opened. Not quietly, they swung wide with purpose. Heavy hinges echoing against the walls. Every head in the room turned at once. The sound cut through Sienna's voice mid-sentence. 4 people walked in, not military police. No base insignia, dark suits, calm posture. The kind of presence that didn't rush because it never needed permission to enter a room. FBI. Sienna's face lit up with relief so fast it was almost painful to watch. There she said, pointing at me. That's her. Arrest her. She's the fraud. She's been lying to all of you. One of the agents held up a hand not to stop her, but to mark the space. They didn't look at me, not even briefly. They walked straight past my chair, straight past my father, who shrank into himself as they passed, straight to Sienna. The lead agent stopped less than a foot from her and took out a folder. Lieutenant Colonel Sienna Sterling, he said evenly, you are under arrest for conspiracy, federal fraud, and acts constituting treason under Title 18. The room didn't react all at once. It fractured. Sienna laughed. Not performative this time. Real disbelief. That's not funny. The agent didn't blink. Turn around. This is insane, she said, backing away. She set this up. You're making a mistake. 2 agents stepped in, flanking her with movements practiced enough to feel almost gentle. You can't arrest me, she snapped. I'm a whistleblower. The agent nodded once. We're aware. She turned to the panel, frantic now. You see, this proves it. They're after the wrong person. The agent pulled out a second document. We've been monitoring the contractor network connected to your financial activity for 14 months. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Your sister's cooperation, he continued, allowed us to confirm attribution without compromising the broader investigation. Sienna's eyes snapped to me. You talked to them, she whispered. I met her stare. Calm, neutral, gray. No, I said. I listened. The cuffs clicked around her wrists before she could say anything else. The sound was final, not loud, just irreversible. My father stood up halfway, then sat back down, like his legs had forgotten what they were supposed to do. His face had gone pale, the kind of pale that comes from realizing silence has a cost. Sienna twisted against the agents. You can't do this. You need me. The lead agent leaned in slightly. We already got what we needed. She started to shout, then words tripping over each other, accusations dissolving into noise. No one stopped her. No one needed to. The room had already moved past her. As they turned her toward the door, she looked back at me one last time. You think this makes you right, she spat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand up. I think it makes the truth punctual, I said. That landed harder than anything else I could have said. The agents escorted her out without ceremony. No speeches, no cameras, just a door closing on someone who had mistaken attention for immunity. The room stayed silent for a long moment after. Then the chair exhaled slowly. Major Sterling, he said. Yes, I replied. He looked at the agent's empty path, then back at me. Your restraints will be removed. One of the escorts stepped forward and unlocked the cuffs. The pressure disappeared from my wrists, but the marks stayed. I didn't rub them. I didn't hide them. Your status, the chair continued, will be addressed following a full review. I nodded. Understood. My father finally looked at me. Really looked. Not at the uniform, not at the record, at me. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left for him to say. The clock kept counting. 9 minutes had passed. The rest was fallout. I picked up the pen recorder from the table and slid it back into my pocket. The hearing wasn't over, but the story was. And for the first time since this started, I didn't feel like I was reacting. I felt like I'd arrived exactly on time. The room didn't move right away after Sienna was taken out. People stayed in their seats like the air itself was waiting for instructions. Papers lay untouched. Screens stayed frozen. No one rushed to fill the silence because everyone knew this wasn't the kind you talk over. I remained standing where I was, hands free, now jacket still slightly wrinkled, where the cuffs had been. My wrists stung, not painfully, just enough to remind me that restraint had been real, not symbolic. The door opened again. This time, only one person walked in. He was older than the others. Taller too, not because of posture, but because of certainty. His suit wasn't new. It was clean-pressed and unremarkable in a way that suggested he didn't need it to impress anyone. He looked at the panel briefly, then at my father, then finally at me. The room seemed to understand something before I did, because every eye followed him as he crossed the floor. He stopped an arm's length away from me. Then he stood straight, and he saluted, not casually, not as a gesture. A full, deliberate, military salute. Sharp, precise. The kind you don't give unless you mean it. For half a second, no one breathed. "Thank you, Major Sterling," he said, voice steady, clear enough for every corner of the room. "Your embedded work within the Defense Procurement Corruption Network is complete." My father inhaled sharply. The agent didn't look away from me. Without your patience and discretion, we would not have been able to identify the full scope of the operation, or secure federal indictments that will hold. I returned the salute, not fast, not slow, exactly right. "I was told to stay quiet," I said. He nodded. "And you did." Behind him I heard a sound I hadn't expected. A dull thud. Sienna had collapsed. Not dramatically, no scream, no protest. Her knees had simply given out, like her body had finally caught up to what her mind couldn't process. The image she'd built her entire life around had evaporated in under 10 minutes, and there was nothing left to stand on. No one moved to help her. Not right away. The agent lowered his hand and turned slightly toward the panel. "We'll be taking custody of all related materials and coordinating follow-up interviews." The chair nodded, dazed. "Of course." The agent turned back to me. "You're free to go, Major." I didn't move yet. My father had stood up sometime during the exchange. I hadn't heard the chair scrape, but he was on his feet now, staring at me like I'd just stepped out of a place he'd assumed I'd never return from. His hands were shaking. "Brooke," he said. I looked at him then. Really looked. He'd aged in the last few weeks. Not physically, structurally. The certainty he'd built his life on had cracked, and everything underneath it looked unstable. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear I didn't know." I nodded once. "I know." That wasn't forgiveness, it was accuracy. He took a step toward me, then stopped, unsure whether he was allowed to close the distance. That told me more than an apology ever could. "You should have told me," he said weakly. "I couldn't," I replied. "And even if I could have, you wouldn't have believed me." His mouth opened, closed. He had no argument for that. "I don't need your approval," I said, keeping my voice level. I never did. I needed to do the right thing, and I did. He flinched like I'd struck him, not because of the words, but because of how calmly they landed. "I know who I am," I continued. That was never the part I struggled with. The agent waited, giving us space without stepping away. Professional, observant, I turned back to him. "Is it finished, for you?" he said. "Yes." "What about her?" I asked, glancing toward Sienna, who was now being lifted to her feet by officers who treated her like what she was, a liability. "She'll have a long time to think about choices," he replied. I nodded. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair and slid it on. It fit the same way it always had. No medals, no markers, just fabric and purpose. As I walked toward the door, the agent fell into step beside me. "You handled this clean," he said quietly. "Most people can't. Most people need to be seen," I replied. He smiled faintly. "That's why we chose you." Outside, the air felt different, lighter, not because something had been lifted from me, but because something had finally settled into place. My phone buzzed. One message. "Unknown number. It's over," I typed back. "It is." I didn't look back at the building as I walked away. I didn't need to. What mattered wasn't inside those walls anymore. The legacy Sienna had chased had been loud and temporary. Mine had been quiet and permanent. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. People think silence means you lost. That if you don't speak up right away, if you don't defend yourself in public, you must be hiding something. I used to believe that too, back when I thought truth automatically rose to the surface, if you gave it enough oxygen. It doesn't. Silence isn't absence. It's a choice. And like every choice, it can be weak or it can be strategic. The difference isn't how quiet you are. It's whether you still control the situation. When my name started circulating with words like fraud and parasite, I had options. I could have explained my job. I could have demanded people trust me. I could have given interviews, corrected rumors, fought for my image like everyone expected. I didn't do any of that. Not because I was scared, not because I felt guilty, but because I understood something most people don't until it cost them everything. Explaining yourself to the wrong audience is not honesty. It's surrender. Once a narrative is controlled by someone else, every word you say becomes raw material for them. Your anger becomes instability. Your calm becomes calculated. Your silence becomes proof. You don't win that game by playing harder. You win by stepping back and changing the rules. That's what silence gave me. Distance, time, space to think clearly while everyone else burned energy performing. I didn't stop caring. I stopped reacting. There's a difference. A lot of people confuse silence with weakness because they only know one way to fight: loud, immediate, emotional. They think if you don't push back publicly, you're letting the other person define you. But here's the truth most people don't want to hear. If someone has the power to define you with their words, you already gave them too much power. Silence isn't about letting lies stand forever. It's about refusing to engage before you're ready. It's about choosing the moment when truth can't be talked over, edited, or spun. When I stayed quiet, people filled in the blanks themselves. Some assumed the worst. Some assumed I was broken. Some assumed I was finished. I let them, because assumptions are fragile. Evidence isn't. There's a reason manipulators hate silence. It starves them. They need reactions the way fire needs oxygen. They provoke, accuse, escalate, all in the hope that you'll crack and give them something messy to point at. Silence gives them nothing to work with. That doesn't mean you disappear. It means you redirect your energy. Instead of trying to convince people who already decided against you, you build something that speaks when you don't have to. For me, that meant documentation, patterns, timelines, facts that didn't care about tone or popularity. I wasn't trying to win an argument. I was preparing for a moment when arguments would be irrelevant. And that moment came. Here's the part I want you to understand, especially if you're watching this because you're in the middle of something similar. Silence only works if it's intentional. Silent suffering isn't strength. Silent preparation is if you're quiet because you feel small, that's not strategy. If you're quiet because you're collecting leverage, that's control. So ask yourself the right question, not, why isn't anyone defending me, but who benefits if I speak right now? In families, silence is often mislabeled as obedience. In workplaces, it's mislabeled as guilt. In public life, it's mislabeled as weakness. That pressure to explain yourself immediately is rarely about fairness. It's about speed. People want a resolution that makes them comfortable, not one that's true. You don't owe anyone instant clarity at the cost of your long-term stability. Another hard lesson I learned: not everyone deserves access to your story while it's still forming. Some people don't want to understand. They want to interrupt. Some don't want truth. They want confirmation. Silence protects you from handing your unfinished thoughts to people who will weaponize them. This applies outside extreme situations too, in everyday life, in arguments with family, in conflicts at work, in moments when someone misrepresents you and waits to see if you'll panic. You don't always need to respond. You need to observe who's rushing you, who benefits from you reacting emotionally, who gets uncomfortable when you stay calm. Those answers tell you everything. I'm not saying silence is easy. It isn't. It's uncomfortable. It feels like letting go of control when you're actually tightening your grip on it. It means trusting yourself enough to delay validation. That's hard in a world addicted to instant feedback. But here's what silence gave me that noise never could: clarity. When I stopped talking, I could finally hear what mattered. Not the opinions, not the accusations, the structure underneath all of it. Silence let me see patterns instead of personalities, behavior instead of performance, intent instead of words. And when I finally spoke, I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth didn't need help. So if you're in a situation right now where staying quiet feels like losing, I want you to reconsider that instinct. Ask yourself whether speaking would actually move you forward or just make you feel temporarily relieved. Relief fades. Consequences don't. Sometimes the strongest move isn't saying your piece. It's choosing the moment when your silence turns into something undeniable. Silence isn't weakness. Uncontrolled reaction is. And the moment you understand that, you stop trying to be heard by everyone and start preparing to be undeniable to the people who matter. People like to say family is everything, that blood means loyalty, that no matter what happens, home is where you're protected. It sounds comforting and it sells well in movies, but real life isn't obligated to follow that script. I learned that the hard way. For a long time, I believed that if I stayed patient, if I stayed reasonable, my family would eventually see the truth. I thought facts would matter. I thought history would matter. I thought love would override fear. It didn't. What I ran into wasn't hatred. It was something quieter and more dangerous: convenience. When a family decides one person is easier to sacrifice than the image they're protecting, truth becomes negotiable. In my family, roles were assigned early. There was the success story, the public face, the one everyone pointed to with pride. And then there was me, useful, reliable, invisible, the one who handled problems quietly so other people could shine. As long as I stayed in that role, things worked. The moment I disrupted it, the system turned on me. That's the part people don't talk about. Dysfunctional families don't break down when something goes wrong. They break down when someone refuses to play along. When the accusation came, my family didn't ask what was true. They asked what would look clean. They didn't protect the person, they protected the narrative. And that's when I understood something I wish I'd known earlier. Family is not automatically a safe space. It's a structure. And like any structure, it can be healthy or toxic. A toxic family doesn't need yelling or violence. Sometimes it just needs silence and pressure. Sometimes it only needs one golden child and one scapegoat. One person whose mistakes are explained away, and one whose existence becomes a liability. If you've lived that, you know how subtle it can be. You start doubting yourself, not because the facts are unclear, but because everyone else agrees on a version of reality that excludes you. They tell you you're overreacting. They tell you you're being difficult. They tell you to keep the peace. And peace always seems to require you to absorb the damage quietly. That's not peace. That's containment. One of the hardest things I had to accept was that staying connected wasn't the same as staying loyal. Loyalty that requires self-erasure isn't loyalty. It's control. When my mother removed me from the family group chat, it wasn't emotional. It was administrative. A quiet decision that said, "You are no longer part of the system." It hurt less than I expected. Not because it didn't matter, but because it confirmed what I'd already felt for years. Belonging that depends on silence isn't belonging. A lot of people stay in harmful family dynamics because they confuse distance with failure. They think stepping back means they didn't try hard enough. They think setting boundaries is a form of betrayal. It's not. Boundaries are what you build. When love alone isn't enough to keep you safe. They're not punishments. They're instructions for how to treat you. And sometimes the instruction is distance. Walking away doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop negotiating your worth. It means you accept that some people would rather lose you than lose control. That realization is brutal, but it's also freeing. Here's the part that doesn't get said enough. You are allowed to outgrow your family's version of you. You are allowed to become someone they don't recognize. And you are allowed to do it without their permission. Blood may explain where you come from. It doesn't dictate where you stay. After everything collapsed, I didn't rush to replace what I'd lost. I didn't need a new family to prove the old one wrong. I needed stability. I needed relationships that didn't depend on roles or appearances. Over time, I built something quieter, a circle of people who valued consistency over performance, who didn't need me to shrink or shine for their comfort, who respected boundaries because they had their own. That became my family, not because we shared history, but because we shared values. If you're watching this and struggling with guilt about distancing yourself from family, I want you to hear this clearly. Protecting yourself is not an act of aggression. It's an act of responsibility. You don't owe unlimited access to people who repeatedly choose their comfort over your well-being, and you don't have to wait for permission to step back. Family doesn't automatically equal safety. Safety is built on respect, accountability, and the freedom to be honest without being punished for it. If those things aren't present, you're not obligated to stay just because of shared DNA. Leaving doesn't make you heartless. It means you finally chose to stop bleeding quietly for someone else's peace. When people hear the end of my story, they focus on the salute. They picture the FBI agent standing straight in that room. They imagine vindication, applause, a cinematic ending where everything clicks into place and the hero is finally seen. But that moment wasn't the legacy. It was a confirmation. Legacy isn't built in the spotlight. It's built in the hours when no one is paying attention and you still choose to do the right thing. Sienna built her life around visibility. Every promotion photographed, every panel recorded, every handshake amplified. She believed impact required audience, that if enough people saw her, she would matter. I built mine around systems most people never think about. quiet reviews, late-night analysis, decisions that would never carry my name publicly. Neither path looked wrong on the surface. But here's the difference: one required applause to survive. The other didn't. When you build your identity around recognition, you become dependent on it. You start adjusting your values to protect your image. You make choices based on what will look strong instead of what is strong. And the moment recognition disappears, so do you. That's what happened to her. The applause stopped. The narrative flipped. The image cracked. And there was nothing underneath it that could stand on its own. Legacy isn't what people say about you when things are going well. It's what remains when everything external is stripped away. When I was suspended, isolated, publicly accused, there was no audience, no support, no validation, just choices. I could have protected myself. I could have walked away. I could have decided that family wasn't worth the risk, that the system wasn't worth the sacrifice. Instead, I stayed with the facts. Not because I wanted credit, but because I needed to be able to live with myself. That's the part most people skip. They talk about success, they talk about revenge, they talk about justice. They don't talk about self-respect. If I had ignored what I uncovered, if I had let corruption continue, because exposing it would make my life uncomfortable, I would have known. Every day after that, I would have known. You can hide things from the public. You can hide things from your family. You can't hide things from yourself. Real legacy starts there. Ask yourself this. Who are you when no one is watching, when there's no praise? When doing the right thing makes you look weak, naive, or difficult? That's the version of you that defines everything else. We live in a culture that rewards visibility, social media, public validation, immediate reaction. It trains people to measure worth by engagement. But integrity doesn't trend. It doesn't go viral. It doesn't get applause in real time. Sometimes it costs you relationships. Sometimes it costs you comfort. Sometimes it costs you reputation temporarily. And that's where most people fold. They confuse temporary loss with permanent failure. Here's the truth: your name can survive being misunderstood. It can't survive you betraying your own standards. When the FBI agent saluted me, it wasn't because I wanted recognition. It was because I stayed steady long enough for the truth to surface. The salute wasn't a reward. It was a byproduct. If no one had ever known what I did, I still would have done it. That's the test. If the right decision only feels worth it when someone else notices, it's not your value, it's your ego. I'm not saying ego is evil, it's human. But if you let it steer, it will convince you to choose short-term applause over long-term peace. Look at your own life. Are you building something that requires constant validation to feel real? Or are you building something solid enough that it stands whether people clap or not? Legacy isn't about scale, it's about consistency. You don't need to expose corruption to build one. You build it in small choices, telling the truth when it would be easier not to, setting boundaries even when it disappoints people, keeping your word when no one is tracking you. Those are the foundations. Everything else is decoration. When I told my father I didn't need his approval to do what was right, I meant it. Not out of anger, out of clarity. If you depend on other people to confirm your identity, you will always be vulnerable to their fear. Know who you are before the crisis hits. Know what you stand for before it's tested. Know what you won't compromise before someone offers you a reason to. Because the crisis doesn't create your character, it reveals it. At the end of all this, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. That's what legacy actually feels like. Not loud, not dramatic, just solid. And if you walk away from this story with anything, let it be this. Don't build your life around being seen. Build it around being able to look at yourself without flinching. Everything else is temporary.
Final note. This story is a work of fiction, but the valuable lessons we discuss are entirely real and continue to happen to many people every day. If this style isn't for you, that's perfectly okay. Please feel free to look for other content that better suits your needs.